countdown we actually start the episode. Right now, I'm just getting it all ready because I'm going to share a link on that same post that I shared with you earlier today, Scott and TC, and that way people can join us. I was really bad on the turnaround. I should have 2 or 3 days ago let people know, but even with that short of notice, we might get people to view and we might not. But we use YouTube this way because it's kind of the best program for recording. It does an awful lot of work on its own. So anyway, TC, for this episode, Scott, I can't remember. Did I mention to you that we could just use YouTube, or did I mention another program?
You mentioned Audacity and YouTube, yeah.
I'm finding using YouTube works really well.
Are you fine with that? Do you just want us to go with the YouTube and not have an Audacity then, TC?
Yeah, just go with the YouTube. I'm currently I'm editing the one we do with Jeff, and it sounds really good. And I think it's going to be the best intro I've ever done to date. It's really good. You said don't make it.
That was a pretty.
You said don't make it complicated, and I spent like 4 hours doing it because I couldn't help myself.
I knew that you would do that, man. That's why I was thinking about not letting you edit that just so you would actually have a life. TC does a ton of work, Scott, in putting this episode together. So like we kind of broadcast this to YouTube, and we're people that really want to get the episode watched right away can watch it this way. But TC's gonna like kind of cut it down, make us all sound a hell of a lot smarter by taking out all my and most of what I say, right, TC? You leave
I'd say about 30% comes out when you go off track. I'm like, yeah, that shit's coming out. Like when I'm editing the one we do with Jeff, and there's this whole tangent about teaching. I'm like, yeah, that's gone.
Yeah. Well, I kept on trying. So Jeff, the story behind the Longview, Scott, are you at all familiar with the Longview?
I unfortunately not, but I started listening to a couple of them earlier this week to kind of get more familiar with it.
Cool. It's been around since 2012, and it was started by neither of us, actually. It was started by Jeff Gamble, and
we hijacked it.
Yeah, he decided about 6 months ago that he wanted to kind of get out, and he wanted the mission of Longview to continue, and so he's turned it over, and TC kind of talked to me and was like, hey, we should do this together, and it's been pretty awesome. So we've so far recorded, this will be like our 4th episode.
At least our 4th or our 5th, yeah. And I only got one edited and put out, so this is going to be a while. Dude,
like I said, man, don't put out more than like one every couple of weeks, because we're that's as much as content. Like we're putting out content now because later on, when it's the middle of my school year, you're going to send me a Facebook message, and it'll be like 3 days later, and I'll be like, dude, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to get to this. So we'll have quite a few. Anyway, Scott, the Longview's just been basically dedicated to one game for the entirety of its episode. We get somebody who's got some experience with the game, and kind of the goal here is to pick apart your brain. And in many ways, the thing I intend to do during this episode is to pick apart your and TC's brain, because TC is also quite a big fan. But you're the expert here that's on, and yeah. And you just look at TC. Can you trust that guy? He actually lives in Portland too. So
Hipsterville.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just really thrilled to be able to talk about such a huge game like this, and I'm so curious about it. One day TC tells me that we're going to play this one all together, that he's going to get me into a game of this.
I'm going to plant your ass in a chair, and you're going to be like, I don't want to do it all day. Yes, you are. And we're going to do this. I'm getting food. I'm getting snacks, and we're going to sit all around this table all day and have a lot of fun.
All right. So I've got a few announcements that we'll make when we get the episode kicked off. And then once we go ahead and jump in, it'll just kind of all flow from there. The main question I'm going to be asking you, Scott, is, what do you love about it first? And then after that, let's tell our listeners who are unfamiliar what is Twilight Imperium 3 all about. I think we're going to focus on 3, right, Scott? That's your kind of like the wealth of that's kind of the core of your experience with the game, if I got from our messages correct?
Right, yeah. 3 is where I started. I played a little bit of 2, but I didn't play that until after I'd played 3. I got it from a friend that was getting rid of it and tried it, but I still prefer 3, and that's where my expertise would be, I guess.
Excellent. So we'll focus on that. Anything about the one that was just released at Gen Con? Anything that you know, or do we?
I've got some preliminary info on it, just from the website. What they said the differences are going to be.
Okay. So I mean, if we talk about
it's
that,
not
it'll
that
just be
much.
like surface level. I'm pretty sure they released it at Gen Con, didn't they?
Yes.
Oh yeah, people were carrying that sucker around. It was
$150.
Yeah, people were buying like 3 or 4 of them and looking like pack mules.
Dude, oh, that was the worst. Gen Con is, it is so bad for hauling around any amount of merchandise. Like, they're everywhere that you're parked is always like, friggin' just miles away from any of the convention hall. The convention hall itself is like located on like a square mile, so you're like walking all over the place. Probably more than that. I don't know. I don't know. Quantity.
I've never been. I'll take your word for it. Lots of people scare me.
yeah, it's definitely. I just
see that Zerg rush. That Zerg rush when they open the doors. I'm just like,
Yeah. Everybody takes that big like thing, the picture of that, and it just like every time I see that, I'm like,
but
because I just tend to not. I don't know. I tend to be a little bit more. I went to Origins, and I would have totally went to Gen Con this year if my school year hadn't kind of already started out. So
it just amazes
all right, guys,
Gen Con, the lack of patience people have on acquiring stuff. It just blows my mind.
They run for it. There is like,
if you wait like 6, like everything that's at Gen Con comes out during the fall usually, right? Like if you just wait, you can get it. You don't have to like spend all the money to get in, all the money to ship it. I don't get it. Anyway, that's off my soapbox now.
Oh boy, did I delete that? Yes, I'm amazing, and I already deleted the link. Crud. I got to go back to it. Long View Podcast. Here we go. All right, we're still.
There's our live chat. Yep, that's up and going.
The pop-up chat is there. So Scott, I do that pop-up chat. I share that because that's pulled from YouTube.
Okay, and that's on Facebook.
And so that's where if people are watching us live, they can actually be sending us stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and post that.
Yeah, I see the link you just sent there. Copy that.
And TC, would you mind tweeting or retweeting that?
Sure. Let me get on my Twitter feed right quick.
Sure, or you could do it on your daughter's Twitter feed, of course. TC will very frequently. Yeah,
I just compensate. My computer is not at a convenient place to record Twitter. No, hang on. Okay, here we go.
Hello.
All right, here we go. So, guys, any questions? Anything? Oh, Scott, I should ask, is there any particular way that you wanted me to introduce you?
Not really.
Okay.
So however you feel like it.
Okay, sounds good. Yep, I'll just introduce you as Scott Lewis, who's an expert on. He's going to be talking to us today about Twilight Imperium 3. So okay. I don't know if you wanted me to say something about Scott. But I don't know where this is coming from, but the friend I was telling you who does reffing calls himself Jeff the Ref. His name is Jeff, and so
it doesn't ring a bell, unfortunately.
Oh no! You wouldn't know him. You wouldn't know him. He's like high school referee in small town Iowa. So yeah, but he just calls himself Jeff the Ref because it rhymes. And he was the line judge, which apparently was a lot more about being like sort of a social worker for the opposing team as their coach got more and more upset.
Yep.
So that's usually what his stories are all about.
I guess if anything, maybe just my screen name Sigma 013 because that's on BGG. That's what a lot of people recognize other people by as their.
Sure. Okay. Definitely. Let me put that in here.
Oh, okay. And now that we're on the gotcha, I can talk to you. I want to blame you Joe for making me go out and buy Diablo 3 for my console, since you talked so much about Blizzard and StarCraft and that whole thing last time we recorded. And now me and my son are completely hooked on this thing. And Blizzard makes such addictive freaking games.
Yeah, I recently got Overwatch, and it definitely has that addictive quality. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead here and do a countdown, and we'll get kicked off if that sounds all right with you guys.
Sounds great.
Okay. Hey, we got a watcher. We got Murr.
Oh, he's here?
Yeah, he's here. Hey, Murr. So, anyway, we'll get kicked off now. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the Longview Podcast. A game.
It's a game.
It's a game. It's not a podcast. It's a game. I'm gonna redo that. Okay, here we go.
It's a podcast game.
It's a podcast game. It's a game about podcasting. All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the Longview Podcast, in which we take a closer look at the games we play. Today we are going to be talking about Twilight Imperium 3 in all its epic space opera glory. Before that, though, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our sponsor, Game Surplus. Game Surplus, bringing the world of games to you. You can find them at gamesurplus.com. And quick sales pitch here, Game Surplus is an amazing place for customer service, and you'll get the type of care that you'd expect from a friendly local game store, but you'll find it online. Carmen really goes the extra mile to track down games, and he's doing an awesome job of supporting some really great content providers out there, including the Longview and Heavy Cardboard, among others. So really cool stuff there. Check them out at gamesurplus.com.
Did you see their latest promotional at Game Surplus where they're sending metal coins with Lisboa if you pre-order it through them? Really?
I did not know about this, man.
It was on my Twitter feed. I'm like, yeah, you order Lisboa through them, and they throw in the Eagle Griffin metal coins on top of it for free. So, hey, if you're looking for Lisboa and you want some metal coins, you don't want those stupid cardboard ones, now's the time to get it.
That's great news here, TC. Actually, we might have to take a moment here to pause this podcast while I go and pre-order. No, I'm just kidding. I'll be able to get those later. That sounds really good. I still haven't got Lisboa, so I haven't tracked it down, but it sounds to me like the place and the time maybe has come. So, yeah, check them out, gamesurplus.com. Games like Lisboa and a lot of other new ones. So they're carrying all that stuff. All right, next up, I'd like to remind our listeners that the Longview Podcast is now a member of Punchboard Media. Punchboard Media, where we all bring something to the table. So Punchboard Media has all kinds of really great content providers. I really like Gaming Rules with Paul Grogan, who's joined us here on the Longview for our episode of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. You'll also find Katie's Game Corner. That one's
great. That one's fantastic. Check that one out.
Really excellent perspectives there. And man, and then the What Did You Play? They've got like a dozen different things that they're releasing all the time from the What Did You Play guys. What's on the table? So
low player count. Those fellas are doing good stuff. Travis.
Travis. And maybe also you'll check out The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, which if this is the first time you've ever listened to the Longview, I am also the host of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. So that's more of a discussion-focused podcast in which we tackle a topic in the hobby while giving reviews of more of kind of recent games that we've been playing. So
I don't know about those guys. Kind of iffy.
I don't know. Yeah, we kind of got hijacked last week by a couple of guys that, a couple of unsavory characters. So you might look forward to that episode 127 on World Board Gaming Championships, the WBC, in which we got our party crashed by TC and the host of the Longview before TC and I took it over, Jeff Gamble. So you can check that episode out. It's actually currently available on YouTube, as is this episode of the Longview is being recorded live on YouTube. If you're listening to it in its edited form, thank you so much, and you should thank TC. Send him a geek mail. Send him a few geek. What do they call geek gold? Send him some geek gold, and send him an image or a suggestion of what he needs to do to add to his Board Game Geek profile, because up until like a week ago, he didn't even have an avatar.
I'm so lame on that stuff. I'm like, that's work. I'm gonna do that. That's like logging my plays in. Why
It's like,
bother?
TC, I'm never tagging you again until you get an actual picture.
Fine. I think I got a generic long view up because Jeff actually sent me some Geek Gold, so I felt obligated to do it.
Yeah. Well, and for those of you that are unfamiliar, TC is also has his own sort of, well, it's a podcast that's hopefully going to be coming from the dead here and there, maybe like in a mummified version.
It's a secret. It's going to be a secret
okay.
resurrection spell, so we don't want to spoil that one yet. But yeah, there's a slim possibility Tattered Board may be coming back, but it's got to be it's got to be like totality. Everything has to line up perfectly.
Yes, so the Tattered Board is TC's previous endeavor, which really made sense that you were able to take on the Longview then. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because in honor of TC's conversion of the Tattered Board to the Longview podcast in the Punchboard Media realm, we are running a contest for a copy of, drumroll, the revised copy of Agricola. The revised copy of Agricola for anybody out there who has a Tattered Board in your collection. So take a picture of the most worn game that you own in your collection and then either tweet it out and tag the Longview, as well as hashtag Tattered Board for the win. That is hashtag Tattered Board for the win. And also, if you prefer to use Board Game Geek, go to the Board Game Geek Longview Guild, and you'll be able to find a post there that is announcing the contest. You'll just be able to submit your picture on Board Game Geek. So either of those places, we'll be using a random generator here. It'll be on September 3rd. So sorry to all you folks of the future. It's already happened if you're listening after then, but that's actually a couple of weeks from today. And I hope to see lots of people involved in that. And you should just know that my copy of Agricola is one of my most tattered boards. So I thought, what a perfect sort of competition inspiration. So anyway, check all that stuff out. So that's our business. Thank you so much, Scott, for sticking with us through all that, because today we've got an amazing episode about a huge game, one of the biggest games I've ever seen when it's laid out on the table. And we're joined by Scott Lewis, who's known on Board Game Geek as Sigma Zero, and then the number 13. So Sigma Zero 13 is his Board Game Geek username that you may know him by. And Scott has quite a bit of experience, not only with Twilight Imperium 3, but also with its predecessor. So, Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
Excellent, sir. Really look forward to talking about the game. And also, TC, from what I understand, you may have played a game of this in your time.
Oh my goodness. This is the game I cut my teeth on. I remember seeing this big box. I'm like, yes, this is one of my first big purchases years and years and years ago. And this game comes out at least once or twice a year in my gaming group. Wow.
So how long have you had it then? Did you get it when it was new?
No, I didn't. I got it probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I know the expansions were already out when I purchased it, and they became immediate purchases thereafter. I don't have any experience with the second edition. I do, however, have experience with the Twilight Imperium role-playing game, if that counts.
We'll give you a little tip for that, but not quite. You're not quite there.
Okay,
the question though of you guys, whose game box for this game is in better condition? Because I feel like these giant coffin boxes just have a tendency to get crunched because of how impossible they are to fit into a game bag.
Mine's pretty worn, but I've tried to take good care of it because it is one of my favorite games. So it's the box, I think it's split around the corners that I've had to tape up, but it's still serviceable. It hasn't fallen completely apart, and I've got all my stuff in there. It's pretty heavy, though. I don't really put it in a game bag because I don't want it to fall apart even.
No, you just like heave that thing around.
It's manually carried. Yeah, sometimes I get a pallbearer group to bring it with me.
Well, this is actually kind of our second in our series of coffin box, gigantic Fantasy Flight games of yesteryear. Well, I guess I shouldn't even be saying that about yesteryear with Twilight Imperium 3, because even though it was released in 2005, that's 12 years ago, designed by Christian T. Petersen, the Twilight Imperium 4th edition is just been released, as in weeks ago at Gen Con. So this is a very hot topic in a game that I am really thrilled to get to talk about. So it's crazy that it's been around for such a long time. And that's the third edition that was released in 2005. It's such a huge game. By the way, I was referring to StarCraft, and as our our last episode was StarCraft, huge coffin box. Fantasy Flight, really, though, in the last few years has not been putting out these huge boxes. So first of all, before we dive into Twilight Imperium 3, why do you think these huge boxes are not quite as present in Fantasy Flight's catalog?
My guess would be just that they aren't kind of intimidating to people. I know with Twilight Imperium, for me, it took me a few tries to really decide to look at it because the box was so huge. I'm like, man, I don't know if this game is going to be like a 5-day ordeal kind of game. But the fact that they don't make the big boxes, I still think they make games that are just as epic. Like I find Star Wars Rebellion to be one of those games. It's a smaller box, but it packs just as much content into these boxes. So probably somewhat with marketing is my guess, but that doesn't mean that they're scaling back on the scope of their games, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would be behind you 100%. I would add Forbidden Stars to that, which is kind of like another game that we mentioned in our StarCraft episode. It really is taken a lot of what made StarCraft special, of course, adapted it to a different universe, but in a lot of ways, you see a lot of refinement of mechanics and a lot of growth, and not in any way does it sacrifice that epic overall feeling, at least in my opinion. So I totally see where you're coming from there. Question, though. Of all the games that are in coffin boxes, I've heard they had kind of a reputation for being kind of almost just boxes full of empty air. When you open Twilight Imperium 3 for the first time, I mean, when you lay this out on the table, it's just massive. So how much of that box is actually taken up by the game?
Well, for me, it's hard to say because I got both expansions in there.
Yeah.
And I've got some little bling stuff that I've added to it to kind of make it cooler. But it fills up the box pretty good. I had to, I threw out the insert right away. I was able to compress the main game into a tackle box before the expansion came out. But once the first expansion came out, I had to go back to the box, and I fill it up pretty good. But if you just had the base game, it would have a decent amount of air in it. So I think the reputation, and that might be part of why they shrank them too, is they just realized that we've got all this extra space that people are complaining about. Why am I getting this huge box and only filling half of it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
make the game feel smaller.
My expansions, everything in my TI box I can fit. It's pretty full, but I have like 2 little bead boxes full of chits, just stuffed full of chits. Because it is an organizational nightmare if you don't use those things.
Yeah.
So Scott, would you just quickly give us an overview of how you came to be familiar with Twilight Imperium, and specifically what attracted you to the game? Where did you get started? Did you just pick it up off the shelf at a game store and start in the rule book? I mean, what? Because this came out in 2005, so I guess you can tell us maybe where it is that you became interested in the history of that game. I mean, that game definitely predates me as a board gamer by like a long time. Like I've barely got 5 years in this hobby, if that, and this game has been out for like 15. So
it's been 12, I guess. The 20th anniversary this year of Twilight Imperium. The first edition came out in 1998.
Well, that's interesting because you saw it 1998, and then they had a second edition before their third edition, and then for 12 more years, nothing more. So, Well, anyway, Scott, could you tell us about your history with the game and what attracted you?
So I got it in 2006, I think in the summertime. And I think I was attracted. I think, despite what I was saying about being intimidated by the big box is what caught my eye.
Oh.
Board game on the shelf. I'm like, what the heck is this? And so I'd pull it down, look at the box, see that, you have to have a lot of players. It takes a lot of time. I don't know. Kept putting it back on the shelf, but I just couldn't, every time I'd go in the game shop I was seeing this at, I just couldn't stop myself from picking it up and looking at it again. And then in 2006, I was at there was a local game shop that I had, and I was doing some stuff for WizKids at the time as a volunteer. And so I went to Gen Con and picked up, I think, a big Cthulhu miniature for him for the Hero or Horror Clicks game that used to exist. And he offered, instead of, I mean, he said that he'd pay me for it, or he said, I can get you some board games. And so I'm like, well, if I can do this, maybe I'll get Twilight Imperium. And so he got me Twilight Imperium in exchange for getting one of these big giant Cthulhu things, and started playing it and kind of got hooked from there. So turned out it is a massive game, but the worst thing probably for me was reading the rule book, because once I read the rule book, I was hooked, and I was like, I got to get this game.
How did you first start playing? Because it takes a long time, and it can play quite a few players. You kind of want to get, if you can, quite a few players. We'll talk more about what a player counts its best with and whatnot, and what happens when you add expansions. But how do you exactly entice somebody in your game group into, like, hey, you want to come and play one game for an entire Saturday in my house? Like, what blackmail did you have on your friends to get them to play?
Yeah, so it started out the first time, the day I got it, I had my brother, a couple of my brothers and a couple of their friends that they said they'd be willing to give it a try. I don't think we got through a full game. Maybe we got through a few rounds, and it took us longer than we thought, and kind of gave it up. But it was a good learning experience, and half the time was spent pulling the ships off the sprues, because in the third edition, you had to peel.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, I forgot about that.
You had to put it together.
Well, there wasn't really a lot of construction, but they were all on sprues, so we had to get like scissors and twisting, and it took us probably an hour just to get them off the sprues.
And razor blades to like get them shaved off just right. Yeah,
it was quite the ordeal. But after that, I didn't get to play it very often the first year or so I had it. But I had one of my brothers. He likes board games a lot, and I had a couple friends, so we got in some 3 and 4 player games for the first couple years. I'd say maybe like once every 3 or 4 months we got to play it. Then from there, I found a group that we were able to play with approximately monthly that I was with for a couple years.
Whoa.
But in the last few years, I've only been able to play it maybe a handful of times, just because my kids are getting a little older, and just finding the time to commit to that's a little bit harder. But I still play it maybe once or twice a year if I and it's worth the time that you invest into it, in my opinion. So
in your heyday, you were playing this game like a dozen times or so a year.
Yeah, I mean, mine was probably about 9 times a year, because I couldn't make every monthly session, but it was for about 2 or 3 years. We were doing a monthly session, and it was a lot of fun, working with some of the same group and kind of getting to know some of their meta thinking, and it kind of makes for an interesting experience in the game. But,
did it help you? So did you actually become kind of integrated into this group as a result of Twilight Imperium 3, or was this a group that you knew beforehand?
It actually wasn't. So what happened is I was looking for players, so I posted something probably on Board Game Geek, say, hey, I want to play this, and one of the guys in the group kind of said, hey, we've been looking at learning how to play this game. Let's set something up, and so they invited me over for a different game first, just to kind of meet the group. I think it was Conquest of the Empire. And then the next month he had me teach the group Twilight Imperium, and then they got hooked. And so he was able to kind of organize this group. So I wasn't the group organizer. I was just kind of part of the, part of the group. But I didn't know him before.
Wow,
but
that's it sounds like pretty pivotal too, though. But I mean, it kind of was a bigger thing. It kind of ushered you into a gaming group, and that's a pretty big thing for a game, especially when it's a game this big, and it must have been quite a big deal at the time. So you got into Board Game Geek, which probably looked the same in 2006 that it does right now. And which, by the way, I love Board Game Geek. Don't get me wrong. Like, I don't want them to change it, because, I know where everything is and I know how to use everything. And when they change it, I don't anymore. But anyway, my brother won't get involved in Board Game Geek because he's like, Joe, it looks scary. It looks like it's from the 90s. So anyway,
Mark.
Yeah. So this game, it sounds to me like it just kind of like spoke to you, like the thumping of the Jumanji box from the shelf, and then you were able to like get some sort of blood money to get somebody to buy it for you in the form of a HeroClix figure, and then it became your entry into the group. This is sounding very tribal here, Scott. Yeah. So could you tell us about Twilight Imperium 3 and what it was when you read that rule book for the first time that sucked you in and captivated a group that was new to you for roughly 30 plays over the course of several years?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing for me was just the very scope of the game. It's a big empire building game. The thing I like about it is it's not all about the warfare. I mean, warfare is a big part of it, but it's bigger than that. It's about building an empire, managing your resources, trying to, get these objectives, which, some of them are a little bit, there's some arbitrariness to it, but it's still kind of a good adventure in terms of just building an empire and being with, trying to outsmart everybody else, trying to sneak your way into victory. It just, I don't know, it's something about the scope of it. It looked like a big game. It wasn't just going to be this game you sit down in an hour, throw some dice, push the pieces around the board and you're done. But you actually had to, it was almost like a role-playing game in board game form in a way.
Absolutely.
And so when I started playing it and reading the rules, I'm like, I got to give this a try. And, once I started playing it and realizing just how deep the strategy was, it was just great. I mean, it seems more complicated than it is. The rule book is kind of hairy and it looks like there's a lot more to it. But once you know the basics, everything else is just the nuances that you got to learn to really make it work. But, it's a game that every time you play it, you're telling a different space empire story. And it just feels like one of those, they use the word space opera a lot. And to me, it just feels that way. Like I've never come away from a game saying, man, that was the most boring thing I've ever done. Every single game, I come away looking at the clock saying, man, did that really take us 10 hours? It just feels like we got here.
I know, it never feels like a long game. You start playing it and then like the sun goes down and you're like, oh, what? It's dark outside. Should it be dark this soon?
Yeah, it just draws you in, especially if you're playing with the right group, because it's, you just get so involved in what's going on, and you don't feel the time slipping by because it's to me that epic. It just pulls you into it.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I've been very intrigued by. There's a lot of different elements to the game and quite a few phases involved. So first of all, when I look at this giant picture on the board of it's like a lion, like it looks like an anthropomorphic lion.
It's a hakan. It's a hakan. Please use the right terminology.
TC.
It's a hakan. Hakan.
A hakan. Okay, it's a Shere Khan because that's who it's based on. It's the Jungle Book. It's Shere Khan, and he was a tiger. He wasn't a lion. All right. So anyway, what exactly, from that picture that you see on the cover of Twilight Imperium 3, what can you tell me about this universe?
Well, it's a diverse universe. There's lots of different races. I mean, there's one thing I like is that not all the races are humanoid. You get a lot of like Star Trek and Star Wars where everyone's kind of the same, just different. They all look the same. Where you get some of that in Twilight Imperium, but then you've got some really bizarre races, especially in the expansions.
The expansions, bananas.
But even in the base game, you've got like the Nalu, who are they're like snake lady telepath people. Mm-hmm. And they all have their own flavor. I mean, when you play any of the races, they all, you could play the game exactly the same with each of them, but just the subtle flavors kind of dictate how you want to go into the game. And so the flavor, I think, for it, even though it's in-house IP for them, you can tell that there's some thought put into it, even if it's not as deep as some of the more established science fiction things out there. There's some thought put into it. These races weren't just thrown together on a whim. They actually put some thought into what it feels like. And I think the box cover kind of evokes that. You get all these different races vying for control. Some of them look sinister. Some of them look, more angry, benevolent. It's a whole mix of races, all vying for the throne of Mechatol Rex and the Empire.
Yeah, and even when you get your little player mat, if you flip it over, there's like the whole backside is just a backstory for that race. It is like at least 4 or 5 paragraphs worth of text, so you can really get into the scope of this game if you really wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could definitely do a lot with this universe if they wanted to, and they've started to explore that a little bit too.
Yeah, it's a universe that's also in the game Rex, right? Because you just mentioned Rex. Mechatol Rex is kind of what you're fighting for, and in the game Rex, Final Days of an Empire is set in the same universe.
Yeah. So Rex takes place so the Twilight Imperium game takes place in a future after this, thousands of years after a race called the Lazics have fallen. They were this emperor race that just ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and then all these subject races decided to rise up in rebellion. So the game Rex actually revolves around the fall of the Lazics Empire, and then Twilight Imperium follows several millennium later, where the race is kind of coming out of this dark age of the galaxy and trying to reestablish a new empire, and they're all trying to vie for the throne. So they're the same universe, but different time periods.
And you can, even one of the expansions, you can play as the Lazics before the whole thing goes down.
Yeah, there's a scenario in the Shards of the Throne expansion where you can kind of simulate the greater conflict at the end of the Lazics Empire, whereas Rex kind of focuses on the actual planet.
TC, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you said that last statement, you were getting the feels.
I got the feels, man. I think I was one of the few people in the universe when Fantasy Flight didn't get the Dune license and they announced there's going to retheme Dune to Twilight Imperium. I was like so in on that. I was so happy. I was thrilled to death.
Yeah, it's one of I get exactly where you're coming from. I mean, with you guys are making me really interested in just the universe alone, which I think in a lot of ways here, the story that you're telling is a large selling point in Twilight Imperium 3. And while you guys were speaking, the irony did strike me that on the day of the total solar eclipse of the United States, so on the day of eclipse, we're talking about Twilight Imperium 3. Let that sink in for a second.
I thought it was intentional.
Right? This is crazy. So, yeah, Eclipse is, a lot of people compare it to like a Euroized version of Twilight Imperium 3, but I don't think anybody who plays Eclipse is under they have any sort of an idea that it's replacing Twilight Imperium 3. Twilight Imperium 3 is this grand space opera, whereas Eclipse is much more of like an efficiency game. So, Scott, that being said, could you kind of tell me how, like, if you're going to explain just as briefly as humanly possible this huge sprawling game and its different phases and what you're going to expect from a new player standpoint, would you please do that for me now?
Yeah, so the basics of the game is you each start out in your own little corner of the galaxy, and you're each trying to find a certain number of points. So in a standard game, you're playing to 10 points or 9 points, depending on if you're using one of the expansions. And then as you go through, you're going through the phases of each round has 3 phases. You pick these strategy cards, which basically give you some kind of special ability for that turn that everyone else can kind of leapfrog off of in a lesser way or in some alternate way. Everyone picks one of those, and then you go through the turns, and every time it's your turn, you get to do one thing. And usually that's just going to be moving around the board, either conquering planets, attacking other players, or you can activate your special strategy card that gives you some kind of effect. Some of them are more individualized. Some of them involve everybody, like the political one lets you start a political vote for everybody to kind of jump in on that, can add laws to the game, which can kind of tweak the rules as you go along. You do that. You have these little command counters that you use to kind of keep track of how many actions you have. So you have to manage those, because if you run out of those too early and don't really hose yourself in later turns.
No kidding.
And the whole time you have these objectives that are revealed that you're trying to acquire. They have a different range of things they can do. Some of them you have to spend so many resources, which means that for that turn you have to kind of save your resources. It means you're not going to be building as many ships, but you'll have to spend them at the end to acquire these objectives. And the different strategy cards, I think, really what give each turn a different flavor, because there's 8 of them, and you want each of them because they all can do some really cool things. But if someone doesn't take one of them, then certain aspects of the game are going to be left out that round. For instance, if nobody takes the technology card, then nobody's going to be able to acquire new technologies that round. And technologies are things that help your ships become stronger and your empire become better. But in the gist of it, you're basically just trying to go out, focusing on these objectives and trying to just build the best empire you can while trying to fit these objectives. I think where players fail is when they go so much out of their way to build these empires and start attacking each other, and then they don't pay attention to the objectives. So other people are at 8, 9 points and they're at 3, even though they have this big powerhouse army or fleet floating out there. attacking people, but everyone else is closer to winning the game because they've actually been focusing on the objectives, which represent the custodians of the empire left behind from the fall of the Lazics, saying, hey, we want a new empire, but if you want to do this, you have to prove to us you're worthy to be an empire.
Oh, so they're like kind of ushering you in. They're being essentially, they know that they're going away, and they're kind of trying to have some bit of a say in who gets to be the next.
Exactly. They were kind of put in as custodians. They were like the servants of the old emperors. And when the empire fell apart, they stuck around saying, we're going to protect this planet until a new worthy contender for the throne appears. And so taking the central planet isn't enough to win. I mean, it usually can get you a long way there, but there's more to building an empire than having the planet. And the various objectives you get are kind of representative of, this is what we're looking for in a strong leader for the galaxy.
Great. But they also give you some sort of a bonus, or are they just simply an objective that counts as one more objective towards your ultimate goal?
Yeah, the objectives themselves don't give you any bonus other than the points you get. Taking the central planet doesn't really give you any specific bonus other than it's worth a lot of influence, which is used for voting and a few other aspects of the game. But if you don't focus on the objectives, you're not going to win the game. So it's you have to kind of balance maintaining your empire and building it with meeting these objectives. Because if you focus on the objectives without worrying about your resource management, you're going to stall eventually because you're not going to be able to move to the next level. There's two different stages of objectives, and as the game proceeds, you get these harder objectives that come into play that if you haven't been building your empire, you're going to have a lot harder time achieving them. And if you don't achieve those, you're very unlikely to win the game.
So when you're explaining the game, you make sure to tell new players, like, hey, these are going to come out. You need to make sure that you're taking care of this.
Right. I always emphasize these are objectives. This is what you need to win the game. Everything else is secondary to that. And obviously the rest of the game is the bulk of the game, but you have to keep the goal in mind, because if you don't, you might have a great time going out and wiping each other out, but you're not going to ultimately end up winning the game because you're not focusing on that, which, thematically you could probably explain anything, but it represents the custodians saying, well, these guys are just a bunch of mavericks. We don't really want them, controlling the destiny of the universe here.
What's interesting is I'm drawing a comparison there, but a little bit different with Through the Ages. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. But in that game, people tend to do everything but never really focus much on military in their first game, like, unless you really emphasize it. And I've never seen anything worse than when somebody realizes about 4 or 5 turns from the probable end of the game that they're just going to keep getting pummeled over and over and over by everybody else at the table because of how underpowered their military is. So definitely something that you need to be focusing on here is getting yourself points, but you're going to have to be taking time off from the essential, like, teching and base management. To what degree are you, like, building buildings? Like, to what degree is this similar to, like, a real-time strategy game? Or is it nothing like that? Is it more like, you just have a certain amount based on how many places you control of resources to deal with, and you just allocate those and are able to build things wherever? I guess, is the management part of the game very intricate?
I think it is, because in Twilight Imperium, you can't just build anywhere you want. So you have to build these space docks, which are really where your units can come from. So the real-time strategy element, I never really thought of it that way, but I can see some comparisons there that you can't just plop units anywhere. If you want to build a unit, you have to build a little base for them to come out of. And again, you're limited to 3 of these space docks. And so some players like to consolidate them in one system so that they can build a massive amount of stuff all at once. But that means that they're farther away from the edges of your empire, where some people like to kind of spread out their space docks. You can't build as much at any one given space dock, but at least you can be a little more flexible about how you're spreading out your forces. So you have to really plan for that, because you only have 3 of these. You can't build space docks on every planet you control. And if you don't place them in effective places, you could just be setting yourself back when you start running into conflicts with your other players.
Absolutely. So you also mentioned that there's like a negotiation phase in which new laws are enacted. Could you, either of you guys, I guess, care to elaborate on this?
Well, so the in the base game, there was a card called political. Well, what happens is you draw a card from the top of this deck, which is called political, a political deck that has a different laws. And there was two kinds of things, some that were just instant and some that were long-term laws. And after you've drawn this, then there's, especially if it's one of the laws that could really have far-reaching impacts in the game, you get a lot of discussion among the players saying, what's this going to affect? If it's something that can hurt the players, you may get the players that are behind saying, yeah, let's do this so we can get the leaders in check, whereas those who are in the lead are going to try to vote against it. Or if it's one that you elect a player to get some special power, they're obviously going to try to get themselves elected. So there's a lot of negotiation that gets involved. And another part of the game that can sometimes play into that is in the third edition, your votes equals the number of influence that you still have. So as you go through a round and build stuff, you're exhausting your planets that you've used, and planets have resources and influence on them. And so if you exhaust a planet that has influence, as part of what you're doing to build something, you're losing your votes for the round. So a lot of the play is whoever has this card that activates this voting phase sometimes tries to play the other players a little bit and make them spend their planets while trying to reserve theirs as much as possible so that when it's time to vote, they have a majority vote that they can kind of really swing things around. So there's a lot of manipulation in doing that could really swing the game. And there's some laws, unfortunately, that were kind of boring that everyone's closer. Yeah. Well, not of them really OP, just more boring that, everyone gets something and everyone's like, well, why not? Sure, everyone votes for it. There's no controversy. But there's a few that caused that. One of my favorites was a vote called the Ancient Artifact, which if it gets voted for, would die. On a 1 to 5, basically the artifact explodes, killing everybody on Mechatol Rex and a lot of people in the adjacent systems. If you roll a 6 to 10, everyone gets a free tech. Sometimes the person who controls Mechatol Rex and the surrounding systems might be a little leery about voting for this law because there's a 50% chance they lose everything.
But everyone votes for it. They're like, yeah, we're voting for this sucker, man.
So it could be really interesting to see what happens. Or if you have someone who's in the lead and then there's a execution, which vote for get some nasty stuff against them, they lose like a bunch of action cards and a lot of their planets go exhausted. And so the person in the lead obviously doesn't want to be the target of this, and so they're going to be trying to make deals with their neighbors, say, hey, if you don't vote for me, I'll give you all this stuff, I'll cede this planet to you, and don't kill me. So there could be a lot of some of the laws can be really fun to play with, and some people have taken that and it kind of culled down the deck a little bit so that they take out anyone they find boring, so that all the political cards are more interesting to deal with.
Oh, yes, that just sounds hilarious because you got a whole group that's just like, I want to see this. It's kind of more.
It really gets interesting because there are cards in that game that completely change the way the game is played, and everybody just the reactions like, oh my gosh, and you have one person's like, yes, this is happening, and what's it going to take for this to happen? I got trade goods I'll give you to vote for this sucker.
Right.
So influence is what you spend to vote, correct?
To vote, you actually don't spend it to vote. The influence when you spend it is typically spent to gain more of those command counters that you use to activate systems on the board to move stuff around. So, but some planets have both resources, which you use to build ships, and influence, which you use to vote command counters. And some of them, you have to kind of make a decision, what do I want to use it for? Because if you have a planet that has 3 resources and 1 influence, isn't going to be a big deal, but I've had many votes that come down to 1 or 2 votes swinging it one way or the other, that if you would have waited and spent it later, it could make a big difference. So you have to kind of to know someone's got this political card that could activate this voting, so you have to change your strategy a little bit and how you're building, because you don't know what's coming up in this political phase, and especially if you're the one in the lead. Anytime you're in the lead in this game, you've got a big target painted on you. A lot of people focus on being second place or third place, but not too far behind, so they can try to jump ahead, because the people that aren't in the lead tend to not get picked on as much until you start playing with groups, and then they start realizing, hey, wait, he may be in second place, but he only has to do this and this and this, and he's won the game.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, it sounds to me like there's really your meta, like you were saying earlier, starts to develop as you play multiple times.
Yeah, because most of the objectives are public, so you see what they are going into it. Mm-hmm. And so you can see, like, wait, if he can do this one, and this one, and he's really close to doing 2 of these things, he's going to get his 10 points. We need an armada, guys. Like, we need an alliance right now. Mechatol's got to go.
So how much of the system is explored? Is it a 4X game, or is it entirely explored at the start? It's so you start out with the whole galaxy explored, so it's not really a true 4X game. Okay. There is a variant called Distant Suns that allows you to put these tokens on the various planets that when you initially land on it, you could have some effect. Either, sometimes you run into a radiated world or you find free trade goods or all sorts of effects. But that's about the closest it really comes to exploration.
Or supernova. I've run across that.
One's fun.
But my ships, they're gone. Okay, sweet.
All right, so it sounds to me like there's quite a bit of interaction between players here, and when you play this game, are you ever leery of a specific player because not only of the race that they are, but maybe the combination of what you've seen them do in prior games or in prior games of something even besides Twilight Imperium 3?
Yeah, absolutely. I have, of the people I've played with, there's a couple guys that I know that these guys are warmongers. I mean, they try to win, but they do it a lot more aggressively, and they like to play with the more aggressive races. So like the Sardak Nor or the L1Z1X, the Letnev, they're the ones that have a lot more military. They like playing with those guys because they go out there and just hammer the other players, whereas other players are like more the diplomats or the it's fun that you can play a race that suits your play style. You can also twist the different races to your own play style if you want to. It's like the L1Z1X are never going to be a big diplomatic race, but you can play a diplomat by force if you have to, by saying, hey, I'll leave you alone if you contribute so that I'll focus on the other guy and not attack you. But yeah, once you get to know your players, you'll know, hey, this guy, he's not going to beat around the bush. I myself try to make so whenever I make a deal, I keep the deal. But as some of my gamers have learned, that I sometimes word the deal very carefully so that I have a loophole. And they know that. They know I'm not going to go outright and just say, I'm screwing you over. But they very wary of what kind of deals they make with me, because I've burned them enough times with loopholes that they've started to catch on a little.
TC,
yes, sir.
How do you play Twilight Imperium 3? What kind of a player would you consider yourself? Have you ever totally turned around on a player? What kind of reputation would you have in your groups?
Well, I try to play with the spirit of the race I have, but I remember the game I specifically took the viruses, and everybody knew what was coming when I picked the viruses, and they knew what they were in for. But yeah, when I play it, I usually, try to keep it like if I have one, I usually get 2 at random, right? And I read up, I'm like, okay, these guys are pirates. I'm going to be the pirate race this game, and everybody knows that because I flat out announce, I'm like, hey guys, I'm the pirate, so I'm going to be pirating everyone. It's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, that one game, I cemented my TI3 reputation when I played the viruses, and I was so aggressive and so out of control in that game. Everyone made a pact to wipe the viruses out of the face of the galaxy, and they pretty much did it. It was a pretty cool game.
Yeah, well, we had a good question here in our chat, Scott, is whether or not you were a lawyer, considering that you choose your words carefully to find loopholes.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm a computer programmer. I think I've gotten that way just because I do like to read game rules, and I'm a referee for sports, so I've had to learn to the rules are worded
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to play the rules, right? And that's it. It was a funny comment for me to read because my dad was a lawyer. He was a lawyer, just retired not too long ago. But man, like growing up, you had to be so careful exactly what words he said because like you'd end up like on a road trip, that's actually 3.5 hours, and he'd tell you something about it's not too far. And when you hear it's not too far and you're a kid, you think like, oh, it must be like an hour or less. And no, not with my dad, man.
See, when I play Twilight Imperium, and I'm playing with someone like Scott, and they're being really specific with their words, all I hear is blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, whatever this guy's saying, I don't care. And it's worthless. So I'm just going to do my own thing. If it gets in my way, I'm going to hit him with the hammer.
Well, it sounds like, would you say, Scott, that you can win Twilight Imperium 3 to have at least some elements of agreement and negotiation, to keep other players either from attacking you or just to be able, like, I don't know, like on what level is this kind of like diplomacy where you pretty much have to have support and alliances formed throughout the game?
You can win on your own, but it's going to be a lot tougher because if you hack, they're going to be voting these laws against you. Your neighbor's going to be attacking you. They're going to make deals with each other saying, hey, I'll let you take this system so that you can go attack him here. So I think, some negotiation is definitely important to win in the game. I mean, everyone wants to win, so you're not going to have someone negotiate to say, hey, I'll give you the game. But, they're going to want to try to win themselves and these things that will allow both of you to at least have a shot at it. Because very rare that you're going to find a player win the game that doesn't have some kind of even some of the really warmongery races like the necrovirus that TC was talking about. They have to draw a line somewhere because if everyone starts ganging up on them, nobody can stand up against 5 different players militarily.
Yeah, and one of the most common negotiation tactics in this game is to say something like this: "Hey, I got to move right next to your home system. Now, don't worry. I'm not going to take over your home system. I just need to be next to your home system to take care of this secret objective, which is going to get me a victory point. I promise, as soon as I get to that planet, I'm going to pull out. And I'm not a threat to you." And I see that happen a lot with people who are behind trying to catch up to catch the leader. That happens a lot. And I've also seen it where they say, okay, fine, and then their home planet's gone the next turn.
I did that once. Yeah, I said, I won't attack this planet if you give me 3 trade goods. So he gave me 3 trade goods, and I attacked his home system instead.
Oh, ooh.
Yeah. This game is full of stories like that. It's just full of it.
Attack his home system instead. Hit him where it counts.
But I was true to my word. I didn't attack that planet.
I'm sure that he felt very, like, that was absolutely great. It was good counseling on your part, like, hey, dude, I didn't lie. I may have done something worse than I told you that I threatened you with, but I didn't lie.
He may have given me a few dirty looks for the rest of that game, but yeah, it's all good. I mean, the nice thing about the game is you could do stuff like that, and especially, in the context of the game, and, if you're with the right group, they're not going to take a grudge personally. I mean, after the game, we were laughing about it because, like I said, in the game, I want people to know that, I'm not going to do I'm not going to break a deal. But he's learned saying, okay, well, next time I'm going to make sure I listen more closely what deal you're offering me here. And he hasn't really let me do anything like that to him since. So
that takes one game. Usually just one game.
Yep.
Well, I just want to talk to Scott here for a minute. There's 2 things to me that really make this game stand apart. And the 2 mechanisms I really like. One of them is that when you take a command and everyone gets to take a secondary action, because that ensures that you're just not sitting waiting for someone to take their turn. Everyone's involved when everybody takes an action. That was the first thing that drew me to this, that I thought set it apart. The second thing that set this game apart when I was looking at it was the whole political phase, because I've never seen a 4X game that threw in a political segment like this. What do you think about those 2 mechanisms that this game presents?
Yeah, so I really like the strategy card system where you pick something and when you activate it, everyone else gets to do it, because I think it adds a real layer of strategy to the game. For instance, with technology, the person who takes it, they get a free technology, and then they can buy a second technology, and everyone else gets to buy a technology at a cheaper price than the first player. But where some of the strategy comes into that is, deciding when to do that, because the person who has it, he's like, I know I'm going to get a free tech, and if I play my cards right, I can get a second one. But he's going to wait and see if other people will start spending their resources building ships, so that by the time he finally activates his card, the other players don't have enough resources to buy the technology. Or he might want to activate it early because he really needs this technology now so that he can go invade this other planet. And so the other players may want to jump on that, saying, okay, we want to try to force him to activate it sooner than later. So I really like the way that these strategy cards do that you have a lot of depth in how you play the cards, how you activate these cards, so that you do them at just the right time so that you get maximum effect out of them. And that kind of ties along into the political phase as well, because I think that's one of the things I really like. Some people hate the political phase, but I think it's one of the things that really makes it shine, because even though some of the political cards themselves aren't very fun, when you get those really cool ones, the dynamics around the table can be really interesting as people start, pleading for mercy or whatever to try to make it so that they're not the target of some really nasty effect. Or, if they're behind, they're going to start playing but I'm losing card, make me the Minister of War so that I can get these bonuses against my neighbors who keep trying to kill me. And, I think it's going to be dependent on the group. If the group's not really into the political aspect of the game, it's probably going to fall flat. But for me and everyone I've played with, it always ends up shining, because, we really try to just get into the political system, and you want to make it best for yourself, but sometimes you're willing to work out a deal with your neighbor so that, hey, I'll vote for you on this thing here if you'll cede that planet to me for a couple turns so that I can get this objective that I'm trying to get towards.
Yeah, and my other question is, do you still play with the base strategy cards?
Not very often. I won't refuse to play with them like some will, but I do prefer Bureaucracy over Imperial. Although I do like Imperial 2, which is an alternate one that they introduced that kind of removes some of the problem that people had with the original Imperial card. But I do typically play with most of the replacement cards from Shattered Empires. But I do like to mix and match some of the cards.
So is Imperial the deck in the first game then?
Yeah, the problem with the biggest complaint that this game has is that I think it's the 8th strategy card, which is called the Imperial card. You just grab it and you get 2 victory points automatically. And in a 10-point game, all you have to do is grab that thing like 5 times and the game's over.
Yeah, it kind of acted as a clock in a way to make sure that everyone was taking it. And what happened is, so basically the person who gets to pick these cards first every round would take the strategy or the Imperial strategy card, because it gives you 2 points. The next person would almost always take the card called Initiative.
So they get to pick the next time.
Yeah, they get the first pick next time. So it kind of went around a circle like that. Whereas with the Shattered Empire cards, that kind of changed the dynamic, because there was no card that just gave you a free victory point. The replacement Bureaucracy lets you score an objective immediately and another one at the end of the turn, because normally you were only allowed to score 1 per turn. So you're limited on, you couldn't just try to score a massive amount. You had to pace yourself, whereas Bureaucracy could let you catch up or pull ahead by letting you score 2 objectives in 1 round, but you had to be able to qualify for them. So there wasn't always the direct need to take Bureaucracy, because you may not have anything you can achieve right now. And it opened up the door for a little bit more flexibility in it. So while I personally didn't mind the timer element, I do definitely see why people don't like it. And I personally prefer the Bureaucracy as well.
Isn't there another one that like you have to control Mechatol before you get the point?
Yeah. So what Imperial 2 did?
Yeah, Imperial 2. That's right.
Yeah, that one lets you. I'm trying to remember which one. I think you get a point if you control Mechatol, or I have to look at the thing. I haven't played with that one in a while. So, but you get to get the point, but you have to control Mechatol. But if you don't control Mechatol, you still have some incentive to take it, because if you do that, you get to activate the secondary of the card for free, which lets you build at a system without activating it. You still have to pay for the units, but building without activating the system is huge, because now you can have this huge fleet that you can use right now.
Yeah. It was 1 victory point I'm looking at now. If you control Mechatol, you just gain 1 victory point. It's just flat out 2 for just grabbing the card.
Yeah,
so there's 8 cards in this game that are essentially, it sounds like you're doing role selection.
Like Puerto Rico, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I mean, it doesn't dictate your whole turn, but it does dictate some of the maybe the focus that you have for that part of that turn.
Sounds kind of like Carson City, maybe, where in Carson City it gives you a limit as to how much money you can earn that, or you can hold and carry over that turn, and then a special ability as well as the numbers on the card kind of affect turn order in the future, which sounds a bit like the initiative card.
Yeah. So in Twilight Imperium, each of the cards is numbered 1 to 8, and those cards drive the turn order. So the more powerful cards tend to have higher numbers because they go later in the turn. And the lower cards tend to be a little bit weaker, although they still are useful, but you go earlier in the turn. And so sometimes in the latter parts of the game, that can dictate how you want to pull things, because if you want to go but before a certain other player, you're going to want to pick a low strategy card, even if you don't really care for the actual text on the card. But if you're trying to invade someone else, you want to go before them so that they don't have a chance to do anything to protect themselves. But each of these cards does something different. The strategy phase typically goes pretty quick, but there's still a lot of thinking because the initiative order can be really important, and the power that you get from these cards can sometimes be the difference between gaining a point and not gaining a point in a given turn. So there's always a lot of thought that goes into taking these cards.
Yeah, and,
sure.
And everyone gets a secondary action off of the primary action, that the person who takes it.
Yeah.
So is that during the strategy phase that happens? Like when somebody takes Imperial, everybody else gets a secondary action?
Yeah,
not right away. So you take the card, and then it's not till the action phase that you choose when during the action phase you actually want to use your card. So the strategy phase, you're just picking it up and having it. Everyone knows you have it. And then when you decide to actually use it, then everyone else will get to use that secondary.
Sure. So another question here. You guys talked a little bit about the differences between the races that you can be in the game. Like, how distinguishable are the races from one another? Is it just a single special ability? Are we talking about an entire like military force that's diversified and has units that are unique to that specific race? Does it have special abilities? You know, like what kind of special abilities, what kind of differentiation do we have between the races?
So in the base game, the biggest differentiation is they all have their own special abilities that change the game rules in some way. Like for instance, the Nalu race, they're kind of these telepathic snake lady people. One of their special abilities is that their initiative number is always 0. So it doesn't matter which card they take, they always will go first, which can be huge. There's another race that's
called. Could they just use that to ham the Imperial card though?
They could, but they don't get to pick strategies first. They don't get to go first until the actual action phase. So they still.
Oh, gotcha.
So
they just execute it before everyone else.
Right. Yeah. So they get the first action when it's time to start doing stuff on the board. And the other thing that kind of sets apart the different races is every race starts out with different units and different technologies. And the technologies you start with can really drive which direction you go down the technology tree. Because if you start with certain cards that are in the red technologies, which are the more warfare-oriented ones, you're going to oftentimes go down a more warfare-oriented route, although you're not limited to that. There are times it makes sense to branch to a different direction. But in-game, I mean, you can play, a lot of the game the same, but that race you choose does dictate a lot how you kind of need to focus your strategy. You can bend it to some degree. You're not forced down a specific script, but if you choose certain races, you're going to have to kind of play to the strengths of those races. If you pick a race that's really good in combat, you're going to want to start combat to get advantage of that. Like the Necrovirus that TC talked about, they can't research technology on their own. The only way they get technology is by attacking other players or being.
You see how popular I was?
Yeah. So they if they want to get technologies, they have to be attacking a lot of players.
And they don't necessarily have to win. They just have to do a combat. And one of the games I played, what race starts with the War Suns? There's a race that starts with War Suns. The first thing I did was I was just in a ship flat out to attack them just to absorb that technology.
Yeah, that's the Embers of Muat. They start with a really powerful ship, and they're typically a target. They always want to be across the board from the Necrovirus when they're in play, because nobody wants the Necrovirus having those War Suns.
And another thing that gives and at least in the expansions, is you get a flagship, and each flagship is unique to each race. Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
so they add some more diversity in the expansion. You get another, essentially a second special ability to add to
what
you
so
already do.
the first expansion and also the second expansion added to this, each race got a special technology that only they could research. The second expansion came with the flagships that TC mentioned, and also these representatives that you can use in the voting phase, which were kind of they were very divisive. Some players hate them, some players love them. I thought they added flavor to the game. I like using them.
I like using them a lot. Yeah, because you could send someone out to vote, and then you can send an assassin after. It's like, yeah, you don't vote for that.
Yeah, you assassinate the necrovirus. Have one that blows up the Senate for that turn, so that nobody can vote.
That's pretty cool.
It's really fun, but yeah. And then there's an optional rule in the base game that you add leaders to your different races. Which there's 5 different types of leaders that can do all sorts of things, from helping your ships fight better to being better at ground combat or better at research, and every race has a different combination of those leaders. So if you get all the expansions, the flavor and the theme of each of these races really starts coming out and making them different. But even in the base game alone, there's still a lot of diversity between the races that you can tell they're not just, it's not just a painting on top of it. Every race plays differently because of how the abilities interact with each other.
My next question is regarding that specific event that you said. Like, players get the choice to like vote on an event, and then after the event happens, a die roll happens, and it sounded to me like that die roll was 50-50 and quite a big swing. So do you think that sort of adds drama, tension, and does it kind of, what kind of a spirit do you think that sort of thing creates when you've got a 50-50 choice or a 50-50 chance on a die roll between I get a good ability that's really cool and my entire fleet that's on this world gets blown up and I'm pretty much wiped from that area of the board?
Yeah, I mean, so not every law is like that. Most of the laws,
that's a pretty rare one.
Yeah, most of them are pretty deterministic at what happens once it happens. But I think that one does add a lot of drama, because if there's players that aren't on that central planet and don't really have anything to lose, they're going to be all for voting for this law, because it's like, 50% chance nothing happens, 50% I get something cool. Whereas anybody who has something to lose, they start to really think, so is it worth the 50% chance of losing half my stuff to get some technology? Especially if they're not the ones controlling that central planet, but just on the periphery, they may say, okay, I'm not going to lose as much stuff. I want to hose this guy in the middle. So it can really open up a lot of drama in that case, because the person in the middle, he's probably just going to want the law to fail outright because he doesn't want to risk it. He doesn't want to lose all his stuff.
And it's called a space opera.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it adds drama, but I think if all the laws were that way, it could probably get tedious. So I think it's good that those kind of laws are pretty rare.
There's impact when they actually do come up because there's few of them.
Right. Yeah.
How is combat handled in the game?
So
it's your favorite mechanic. It's dice.
Yeah. It is a lot of dice. So you have all these different kinds of ships. They all have different values, combat values that are kind of their 2-hit value. So for each type of ship you have in a battle, you roll a die. If you make its 2-hit value, you inflict a casualty to the other player. And then it's kind of a little bit of attrition in that way. So it's not really that complicated. I think really where the combat is, the strategy of the combat isn't so much in the actual combat. It's more in the fleet composition that you build before you get to combat. So knowing what to bring into it. So fighters are very weak, but if you build a swarm of them, they can kind of shield your whole fleet from attacks, because you get to choose where casualties.
Yeah, you get to choose your casualties. That's pretty big. So if you go with a bunch of fighters, you're like, okay, that fighter's, was they only the fighters hit like a 9s or 10s?
Yep.
It's something ridiculous. And actually just use those to take damage to protect your bigger ships.
Yeah. And so in the expansions, especially, they started introducing abilities to kind of mitigate some of that. Like there's a ship called a destroyer that has an ability that before combat, they get to roll dice to try to just destroy fighters specifically.
Yeah, like missiles or something.
And then there's a technology that they can get in one of the expansions that makes that ability even stronger, so that they can come in. If you bring a couple of these into the fight, you could potentially wipe out their whole fighter screen before the battle even starts.
Kind of like a glass cannon sort of thing.
Right. And so, but if they don't have fighters, these ships on their own are pretty weak, because they're really only good against fighters and only at the beginning of combat. Once they're in the combat, they're kind of wimpy little ships that don't do a whole lot. So
if you don't,
if you have somebody that doesn't have a lot of fighters, you're probably not going to build a lot of these little wimpy ships. You're going to find other ships to use. So knowing what to bring into which battles is crucial. And some of that depends on which technologies you research, because certain technologies will upgrade different aspects of various ships. And it depends on which resources you have. And plus you're limited by a fleet supply that you have to kind of manage throughout the game. So if your fleet supply is only 3, you can only bring in 3 capital ships to the battle. And so you want those to be strong ships, but the strong ships tend to be more expensive and slower to move around. Where if you have a huge fleet supply, then you can bring in a whole bunch of little ships and just overwhelm them with sheer numbers.
And there's also ground battles going on too, by the way.
Yeah. And the ground battle is a little bit more boring because until you get the second expansion, there's only one type of ground unit. And so it's just kind of a back and forth dice fest. But there's these cards, these action cards that you can play in various times of the game that can sometimes swing things one way or the other. But the fun thing about combat is, even though it's just a dice fest, there's still times where it can just be really tense. I had a game once that I was doing an online game where I was hosting it, and there was a player that attacked another player out of desperation. He was losing. He needed this last-ditch attempt if he wanted any chance to winning. And I think, his odds were maybe about 5% when I ran it through a simulation program that someone had written. So the chances of him winning were pretty slim, but he knew that coming in, because if I don't win this, I'm out of the game, basically. And he ended up pulling off the victory, partly because he had a couple cards that kind of helped him nudge things in the right direction. But so
you're able to play cards during combat, or were these cards like his text that he came into the combat already
these
stacked
cards
with?
You can play during the combat. So there's a deck of cards called action cards, which they have various effects. I mean, there's like 200 of these cards, and some of them apply to combat, some of them apply outside of combat. It just depends on which ones you have. But the ones that apply during combat can sometimes give you a boost to your roll or let you target a specific ship. And things like that.
You have to play those before that round of combat, or can you play that after you've seen what you roll?
It depends on the card. Some of them you have to play before, some of them you have to play afterwards. So it tells you right on the card.
So there's definitely there's a card play aspect to this, and your cards sometimes then you'll be able to be hanging on to essentially some hidden resources that can help you in a battle, especially if everybody's counting on you having that only 5% chance, and you've got a couple of cards that raise it significantly. So you've got, the ability to kind of up jump the double. And I think really that's kind of the point of these sort of, the dice combat, is that it adds this tension, it adds this drama. And you guys are sitting there building this story around how, this necrovirus just kept on getting stomped, face kicked in, because everybody else at the table hated it. It didn't matter, at that point that it was just kind of like an extermination of a virus that the entire galaxy decided was in its best interest.
Yeah.
Well, and I deserved it because I did pull an extremely douchebag move, but I did it to make sure that our new player stayed in the game because he was getting ready to get wiped out.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, there's been a couple of comments about specifically how this can inspire some pretty fierce anger in players.
Yeah, I personally been lucky enough that I haven't had a lot of that in my group. The closest I came was in one of the games I played with, where I think it was more of a personal tension between 2 players that came to a head because one of them wanted the other one to attack me, but it didn't really make sense for the other one to attack me, because then even though it might have hurt me, it would have also hurt them as well. And so they didn't attack me, and I ended up winning. And so after the game, they were kind of almost coming to blows. But for me, it's been pretty rare. But if your group is prone to that kind of thing, you might want to just be careful about how you play the game, because it
can rub people the wrong way.
Right. I don't know if it's as bad as the game Diplomacy, but it has the potential of causing that if people take things too personally.
Well, yeah, you invest a lot when you're playing the game. So, TC, do you have any stories about specific anger?
Well, I can tell you how I got myself eliminated from a game. We were playing with everything up at a convention, and I was my first run with the viruses, and the person not to my immediate right, but down to me, it was his first time playing, and he was just trying to figure out the game, and he was making some mistakes. And the person next to him, this was like a monstrous, like 8-player game with everything in it. We sat around this table the whole day. And this one guy was amassing this fleet like right next to him. I mean, there was at least like, I don't, he had his, what do you call it when you can increase how many ships are in a space?
Your fleet supply.
Your fleet supply. He had this maxed that thing out ridiculously and had like 8 to 10 pieces of plastic in this one hex. And he made it known that he was going to like take this guy out because it was going to be a victory point. Well, I'm going, man, that's really not a good experience for someone to have at this game. And I at least want him to walk away with a really cool story. So I'm looking at my
OTC.
And so I'm just looking at the player, and I look at my virus flagship, and I look at its ability. And its ability is, if this thing takes a hit and blows up, everything in the hex is gone. It's a flying bomb. I'm like, oh, okay. So I sent this thing out by itself to a warp clear across the board. And T-Space says, why are you doing this? Oh, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. I won't worry about it. And then it came to my turn, and the guy got up and walked all the way around to me and saw what my flagship did, and his face turned red because he knew what was about to happen, and there was no way he was going to stop it. And he was pleading. He was willing and dealing. I'm like, no, this is happening. And I walked in there, and you have to hit this thing if it enters your hex. There was like, no, not firing on this thing. He hit it. It blew up. All his ships went up. And at that point, he was like, I'm going out. You're gone. I successfully took the heat off this one player and sent it all my direction. And once people saw what I could do with the viruses in that one move, no one wanted me in the game at that point. And
this sounds like a totally different game than your other virus game. Or is this the same one?
This is the one with the one and only time I played the viruses.
Okay. Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
The other one was the Battle of Garboza, where this battle it was just meaningless battle over Garboza for no victory points whatsoever. And there's one of those situations where I think the guy didn't realize that battles netted you no victory points, because after it's all said and done, he's like, what do I get? Nothing. Yeah, you get Garboza. Oh, and then he sent his whole fleet over there to take care of this player who he thought was a threat. And the person next to him goes, oh, I need your home planet for a victory point condition. So there was nothing on his home planet. So he just went and took over his home planet. He was just done playing the game at that point. It was just over.
Wow. Scott, do you have any epic stories of Twilight Imperium 3?
I think I've run into stuff like that before. I'm trying to think of one recently, but one of the things I like is sometimes you can have these epic games without having the actual war. One of my favorite games was this giant Cold War where I think it was a 4-player game. Everyone had like almost all their plastic stuff on the board. Their borders were just huge. Nobody wanted to attack each other though, because everyone else's stuff was huge. And finally there was a planet that someone needed for some reason. This was one of my first games, so I don't remember the details, but finally someone just started this war. They came in with a minor skirmish. They brought more ships in to counterattack, and it just escalated into this giant flame along the side of his border. And the other 2 players are just laughing, saying, okay, I'll just come and clean up when you guys are done. So it was, I don't remember who was who at that point, but those 2 players were kind of knocked themselves out of the game because they just, whatever it was that they were going after was so important to them that they kind of just wiped each other out to the point where they didn't get eliminated, but they were virtually out of the game at that point.
Yeah, there's one guy I play with. His name is Mike. If he's listening, he'll know. I mean, if we sit next to each other during Twilight Imperium 3, we inevitably get into a battle. We don't care what else is going on around the board as long as we wipe the other person out. So we're just like in the corner, just having our own war while everyone else is busy winning the game because we don't care at that point.
Mm-hmm.
To what degree, Scott, would you say that in the groups that you've played with, there have been people who get into kind of like almost an emotional level conflict where it's like, at this point, the points don't matter. It's whoever gets the last laugh.
Yeah, I think that it hasn't been enough to ruin the game, but I think most games I've played gets to that point at some point, especially if a player falls behind. It's like, well, I can't win now, so You're the and some people call it king making, but I think it's part of the game because if you knock a player out of contention,
expect them to come for you.
Yeah, exactly. If you can't back up with a fleet to protect yourself, then you deserve what you get, kind of thing. Even if you get knocked out of contention yourself, it's like, well, that's part of where the political part of the game comes in. Is some of it's outside the actual voting, but do I really want to hammer this guy that I could just trash, knowing that now for the rest of the game he's just going to be gunning for me and possibly knocking me from first place to second place, or do I want to try to work out a deal with him so I'll leave him alone so I can do this? Because sometimes people get really invested in it emotionally, and not to the point where it ruins the game, but just to the point where they're like, well, screw it, I'm out, you're out too now. So
I'm pretty well known for my suicide runs on Mechatol Rex at the end of the game if I'm not in contention anymore. I'm like, well, you're not going to have if I'm not having Mechatol, neither are you. And I'm just I usually get, you're not playing in the spirit of the game. I'm like, yes, I am. My empire's falling apart. I've got nothing to lose at this point.
Right.
So we've talked a little bit about the player count. So in the base game, it plays 6.
Yeah.
Correct.
Is the game a complete experience without all 6?
I think it can be. I think 6 is the best personally, but I also enjoy playing it with 4. I'm not really a big fan of playing it with 5 unless you use some modified rules, just because there's no way to balance the map with 5.
Okay.
But there's some people that have had some variants on the map setup and things that kind of help mitigate that a little bit. 3 players is okay. The problem with 3 players is that some of the trade and diplomacy aspects of the game kind of go away. I think it's okay if you have the right group of people for playing 3, but 6 is where I find it shines because you get a lot of interaction, but the downtime isn't so bad that you feel like you're just sitting around waiting. So I'd recommend
go up to 8 with the expansion.
Yeah, the expansion,
Yes.
The first expansion brings it up to 8, and I played it with 7 and 8 a couple times, and I prefer with smaller numbers because to me it's a point of diminishing returns at that point. You get more players, but you're not really getting a lot more of the experience, in my opinion. So I try not to play with more than 6, just because it adds more time, but I don't feel it adds more interaction. But that's just my opinion. Some people love the 7 and 8 player epic games too. So.
I love the 8 player epic game of this. It's an all day affair. There's nothing quite like an 8 player Twilight Imperium game.
Yeah, the voting does get more interesting with 8. I'll say that because you've got a lot more people in play.
Scott, just between you and me, if they were to come out with an expansion tomorrow for Twilight Imperium that allowed the game to go up to 16 players, TC would be telling us all that's the only way to play it.
I would be organizing it. I would be organizing the 16-player game.
If my family was out of town for a week and I was just by myself, I might try it once that way, but it'd be hard to play that in a single day.
So with the expansions, though you're not too keen on the extra couple of players that it adds, Scott, and I understand, TC, you throw it all in.
We're in.
But Scott, what does the expansion add, though? Besides, you've mentioned so far that it adds 2 new races, correct? It also adds some more variability in terms of you get more special powers. Is it the unit that you get in the first expansion, or is that?
That's the second expansion. Yeah, so the first expansion, you got 3 new races. You get a whole bunch more hex tiles. And then there's most of the book is just these optional variant rules that you can add into it. Like some of them I like more than others. Like there's these artifacts that you can put on planets, which basically gives you a point as long as you control the planet. There's space mines, which you can see in TC's video right there, which I don't really care as much because it just kind of adds a random element to moving into systems. You can mine a system, and then when ships move in, they have a 20% chance of any given ship blowing up just for moving into the system, which is good for defense, but it's just a little too random for me. So that first expansion, it just adds a whole bunch of options that you can take or leave however you want.
And another big thing that the second one added was a new set of objective cards that make the game more aggressive. I remember we played with that new set of objective cards that came with that first expansion, and that game became a lot more in your face.
Yeah, and I think the thing that a lot of people like about that first expansion is the alternate strategy cards, because a lot of people didn't like the first set. I personally don't mind them, but I do admit that I prefer the expansion set. But yeah, and the third expansion or the second expansion came with a couple new unit types and a few more options. I mean, the thing I like about some of the expansions of this game is they're pretty modular. You can add them or take them out as you see fit. You don't have to use them all. But I think it just adds more variety to the game. I mean, I think what TC was saying about the objectives, I like. Strictly, if you're going by the book, you're supposed to use either the base game or the expansion objectives. I usually just mix them together just so that you don't know what's going to come up. You might get some that are more Empire infrastructure related. You might get some combat ones, and you have a good mix of them. So I prefer to mix them, even though that's technically a house rule to do that.
That's fine. We use it sometimes. I've done it where we mix them. It's fine.
Right.
They also got like mercenaries with that second one. You can hire dudes out. The flagships come with it. The tanks, which are really cool, it change up the ground battles a little bit.
The action cards. I'm sorry, guys. I think you probably mentioned it, but like that action card deck is like 200 cards, right?
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Does it get bigger then with each expansion?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think the 200 is I think with both expansions. I can't remember. The main game is about 100, so I think the 200 is closer to that. I'd have to look. You've got the book right there to see how many.
I can. Well, you keep yakking. I can get a number for you.
It's a pretty huge deck after all said and done. I mean, it's shuffling. It's always fun because shuffling.
103 action cards with the base game.
Okay, and then I think the other expansions add to that. So
yeah,
there's a few cards that are replacement cards, but most of them are brand new cards. And it gets to be a pretty good deck, but I like it because there's a lot of variety in those cards. My favorite card in those decks is a card called Sabotage because it doesn't do anything by itself, but it cancels any other action card. And you want to have this because you can always use it as leverage when someone's trying to play some action card that's really going to hose you. And then where it really gets fun is when someone else knows you have it or suspects you have it, and they're trying to offer a deal saying, hey, if you cancel this guy's card, I'll give you 15 trade goods or something, because if and then you can use it or take the trade goods and say, nope, sorry.
Deals are non-binding here, just
yep.
like.
Oh yeah, they're very non-binding.
Non-binding. Although, like I said, I probably wouldn't do that just because if I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. But if I really wanted to,
you'd be like, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll play a card for your 15 trade goods.
I'll play this card here." Yeah.
Slap down like the wrong card because I was pointing at this card, this one that means I'm now going to attack you.
Yeah, or your opponent gets a bonus now, so. So it can be pretty intense, but yeah, there's a lot of cards, but I think that's what adds to some of the varieties. You just never know what those cards are going to be, but they're not so random that you can't plan for them. Once you know what some of the nastier cards are, you just have to be aware of what they are so that if they hit you, you can bounce back from them.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are, because of the timing of this recording, we are just now on the cusp of the 4th Twilight Imperium edition being announced, and now it's actually been released at Gen Con. So do we understand, is there any what do you think they sought for in looking at that big box? Do you guys have any experience with what's going to be in that big box when you buy it? I know it's one of the few games that they're keeping in a coffin-sized box.
Yeah, well, the box isn't quite coffin size. It's like halfway between that smaller square size and the full-size coffin box.
Is it deeper?
But, I haven't seen the actual box. So it might be. I'm hoping it's deeper so that
I know it's got a plastic insert in it. I've seen that.
Yeah, I saw that picture. So, but what I think what they were looking for with the 4th edition is, and it kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, a lot of people were saying, nope, 3rd edition is the definitive edition. It's staying around. But I think they were trying to take the game and find the things that people really liked and keep them in the game. And then the things that people had the most, complaints or things that people were tweaking the most, finding a way to make it, I hate the word streamlined because I think it gets overused, but they did a good job with streamlining some of the clunkier mechanics in Twilight Imperium 3 without dumbing down the game.
The thing I'm excited for the most is the technology cards, because in TI3 the technology tree is ridiculous. There's like a 2-page spread in the instruction book on how all these technology cards chain together, It is just the spread and trying to figure out technology it's almost a game in of itself,
right.
Literally.
It's a mess. Like, how do I get this card? Well, you need this and this, but you need to get to this one first. And, new player looking at this tree, it's like, I have no idea how to get this next tech that I really want XRD transporters. How do I get that? And it's just trying to find it.
So there is like the tech in this game is very much like a tech tree that you're building off of.
In 3rd edition, yeah. In 4th edition, it's a lot more simplified, that you don't have anything that's a specific prerequisite of another technology. You just have to have certain colors of text already researched. So you have some that you can research without any prerequisites, but then the other ones, instead of it being you need XRD transporters to get this one, it's now you have to have at least one blue tech, which makes it a lot simpler to find which one you want. And I'm sure as expansions come along and there's more variety of text, that it'll give you a lot more options to dig through this tree.
And like when you upgrade your ships, it's really hard to remember like you've upgraded your ships and what those upgrades are. From what I've seen on the 4th edition, you just lay that card straight on your player mat and you actually upgrade the ship with that card. So you immediately know and you can see how your ships have changed, which is really nice from what I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So does all this mean that you guys are going to be converting to the 4th edition?
I've already pre-ordered mine, so I will.
It's on the way.
It's already been done. Okay.
It's there. And that's it. It leads the question. I don't know what I'm going to do with 3rd edition. I'll maybe still play it once in a while, but I've had, almost 12 good years out of my copy of 3rd edition. So even if I don't play it again, I don't feel that I'm getting shafted, because it I had a lot of good times with it. And even though this came out of nowhere, I really like the changes I've seen with it. I think that it's, I didn't think there was a lot wrong with third edition, but I think it just took some of the stuff that was clunky and just, made it a little bit easier to use so that you can play the game and not have to worry about some of the nitty gritty details that sometimes were more tedious than anything.
Well, that's amazing that like you're talking about a game here that's like 12 years old, and to say something like that, like it's, you didn't think it could get any better, and now you're looking at what they've done and you're like, yeah, actually maybe it could have, but it's not something that you were really concerned about. That just shows, like you look at the box and just the art and the production, and it's like 2005. No, this game looks like it's an art piece in the current day. Like that production is amazing. So
yeah.
And I'm going to keep my 3rd edition just because I don't think they're going to include the Fall of the Empire scenario in 4th edition, because it was really weird and esoteric anyway, but it's still a lot of fun to play. So just for that alone, I'm going to hang on to my 3rd edition.
Yeah. And I think, I liked that scenario as well. And plus the 3rd edition has 2 expansions. And while the 4th edition has a lot of the stuff from the expansions, it doesn't have everything. It's not just like 3rd edition and both expansions packed into one box. There's some things they included, like all 17 races from the 3rd edition are included in 4th edition.
The flagships are in it. I'm pretty sure the flagships are in it.
Flagships are in it, but the mechanized units, the tanks are not. Leaders are not. So there's things that they're not in the 4th edition, which may or may not come in an expansion later. But one thing I like about the 4th edition is they opened up some design space for the future. Like the different planets in 4th edition all have a trait associated with them. And in the game, some of them relate to some of the cards from reading some stuff on Board Game Geek, but it definitely opens up some space for a potential replacement for that distant sun's exploration factor by saying, okay, if you land on a planet that's got this hazardous trait, that it might be a dangerous planet to land on. And whereas in the 3rd edition, there really wasn't any differentiation. When you landed on a planet, you don't really know what to expect. So sometimes that's part of why people didn't like it, because they didn't know if landing on this planet was going to completely hose them or give them a big benefit.
Yeah, and the fact that 4th edition coming out just is going to get people more excited to play it. And, and now all of a sudden you're hearing about Twilight Imperium again, which is fine. And I seem to recall reading somewhere, maybe listening to it, that Fantasy Flight has said that Twilight Imperium is not one of their best sellers by far. It is just one of the games that doesn't sell well for them. It's the legacy of that game that keeps it going. And the fact that they're actually took the time to give a 4th edition on the 20th anniversary, I think is just, it's a gift to us, because they very well could have just rethemed it to Star Wars or something just to sell it, but they were passionate enough about their product just to give it a 4th edition and get it back out again, which I think is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know what all the decisions behind the scenes were for it. It could have just been that 3rd edition was not a profitable game anymore in its current format, and they had to update it. But I don't know. It's all guesses at this point. But I agree that it's it was unexpected, but it was definitely something that I'm excited for, because I think it's a good push for people like me that really love the game and want to see everything come out. I mean, I love the Twilight Imperium universe. Some people, it's just another sci-fi thing, but for me, I like the little bit amounts of lore they provide, and I'm excited to see how it continues to get fleshed out in this game, or hopefully other side shoot games like Rex.
Have you played Rex?
I have played Rex, yes. I actually helped playtest Rex, so it was a fun game.
Oh, I love that game. That's like my favorite board game of all time right now. I love that game. We'll have to do a whole nother episode of Rex, because that is so much fun. That's so amazing and epic.
TC's favorite stories are about how somebody flips over their card to win, and then somebody else flips over a card that says, "I knew you were going to win."
Yeah,
I win now.
It's a good game. I don't get to play that one as much as I'd like, because the main people I play with lately don't like it.
Oh yes,
I don't know why, because I love it, but they don't like it. So
yeah, I have it's my birthday game. I have a group of people that are willing to be inflicted upon for the sake of my birthday.
Maybe I could try that and play that card sometime.
It's my birthday, guys. Come on, I never get to play this game.
Yeah, in my group, we had a plan to play Twilight Imperium 3, and it was actually kind of in the wake of a game of diplomacy that we played. We used like an online system to do it, and we were going to play Twilight Imperium 3, and ultimately 18XX was like the necrovirus that infested our group, and if anybody was going to play like a 6-hour, 8-hour, 24-hour in some cases, all-day experience with some of the bigger 18XX games, it was going to be 18XX. Unfortunately, it was not going to be Twilight Imperium 3. So I still would love to play it at some point, even though every time TC suggests it, every time TC is so enthusiastic about a game, it makes me incredibly suspicious. Like he's like, "Joe, you're gonna just, you know what? You should play this game. You love it. Oh yeah." And I picture him, with his hands like this, just evil TC, the necrovirus. That's who you are, man.
You'll never forget the game you had. I promise you that.
Well, Scott, do you have anything specific to leave us with about Twilight Imperium 3, a legacy?
Just that I don't have very many games I rate a 10 on Board Game Geek, because to me that means that's like a game that I could play anytime, anywhere. The only reason I don't play it more often is just because it does take a lot of time. I mean, I find it to be, in terms of Space Empire games, for me, it's the ultimate game. Twilight Imperium 4 may be a good replacement for it, and I'm enthusiastic it will, but it's just one of those, it has everything that I like in that kind of game. It's got the war, it's got the diplomacy, it's got the politics, it's got the interaction between players. You're not just playing multiplayer solitaire out there. And I like that every game feels different. You get some games that are just skirmishes all over the place. Other games are massive cold wars where nobody wants to attack each other until somebody starts a fire, and then boom, it all blows up. So, I haven't found a game that comes anywhere close. There's other games that are 4X games or Space Empire games that they're fun in their own right, but for me, they just don't come close to giving me the experience that I've had with Twilight Imperium.
TC, go now.
Okay, Twilight Imperium. If anybody ever came up to me and said they wanted to play an 18XX game over Twilight Imperium, I would hit them with my copy of Twilight Imperium and say, "We're going to play this once. If I'm going to sit down and play one of these long train games with you, then you're going to sit down and play one of these games with me." I don't rate it a 10, but it is very, very close. This is the game that led me to Rex, that led me to my war game obsession. And it was very direct lineage here. And as far as my experience goes, as far as space exploration battle games go, Twilight Imperium is almost the pinnacle of this type of game. I talk about Star Trek Ascendancy. Yeah, it's cute. It does some neat stuff, but it's nowhere near the epic experience that Twilight Imperium is. Heck, you even mention Twilight Imperium, you almost get this hushed silence of reverence. It's like, whoa, Twilight Imperium. Yeah, I've heard of this game. Oh, right. It literally gets that kind of reaction. And every single game I've run, even the 3-player learning game I've had of this, a story comes out of it. A memorable story comes out of a game of Twilight Imperium. And that is something to be said for a game. If you can come out of every single game of a game with a story to tell, that in itself is an accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And when I run a game, when I play in it, I promise you there will be a story to come out of this thing. And whether you're a good experience, whether it be a bad experience, you will not forget the time you played Twilight Imperium with me.
Yep. I don't think I've had a game of Twilight Imperium where we weren't talking about it for weeks afterwards.
Yeah.
And all the stuff that happened.
Yeah, that one, a big 8-player game, we were talking about that one for months after that. It's like, oh man, I can't believe you did that, and then you eliminated every single troop with your suicide spaceship. Like, yep, that was me. Yep, that was me. Yep, that was fun, wasn't it?
Well, thank you so much, Scott. You've really given this game, you've put almost an epic space opera version of a podcast to Twilight Imperium 3. I think you've really done the game justice, and you've made me quite interested to try it sometime, though TC's evil laugh is always going to give me nightmares. So
wait till you see it across from my board table. He'll be like, oh, what did I do? He's happy. Crap.
It's worth every cackle, I promise.
Yeah, it's really that much fun. And I think that it's hugely dependent on the people you play with. I mean, if you have a group of people that just want to have a good time with the game and just roll with it, wow, you're going to be rolling all over the place with this thing.
Yeah, I really think, talking about it, giving it that sort of there's no game that does what this game does. Just like you guys said, having seen people play it at conventions, it really does. There is just an ebb and flow. It's like there's a roller coaster going on at that table, while the rest of us at the, in the other tables are kind of enjoying our nice little rides that are pleasant and entertain us. But that table over there,
out of control. Yeah. And
that one's going up, and they're all standing up, and so many, how much time of the times you play Twilight Imperium 3 are you actually sitting versus standing?
Oh, there's a lot of standing. And if you can actually go to a convention and find a person who has a tricked out copy with actual plans. I played a game where this guy had these clear plexiglass hexagons on pegs, so you could put the spaceships on top of them and the ground units below on the board. And this guy had this game tricked out like you would not believe. It was incredible.
Scott, do you have a tricked out copy, right?
Not quite like that. I have a whole bunch of pieces that I've scavenged from other games, various laws. There's laws that add stuff to the, make a planet special in some way. So I've painted a little statue to mark one of the planets.
No.
So it's not quite as bad as that, or good as that, I should say. And some people have bought multiple sets of it so they could paint every race with their own special set of plastic units. I haven't done that because you have to buy basically 3 sets of the game to do that for every race.
Whoa.
But I say it's tricked out, but compared to what some of this other stuff that people have, it's pretty trivial.
When someone comes to a convention and they have a big tote and it contains just Twilight Imperium with everything we've tricked out for that game, you have to get in a game of that. It will be amazing.
Well, absolutely. And that sounds to me like, if I could give a recommendation out there to anybody who's interested, we've had some comments here saying, very interested based on what we've been talking about from people who are kind of, going to make their decision based on this episode. It sounds like that's maybe one of the better times to try it, that convention atmosphere, that all day of games. So take that opportunity. I know that I'm planning to at some point. I think I might owe it to TC to try it with them sometime, though I feel like at the same time, it might be the worst thing I've ever done. So we'll end up finding out. And I don't mean because of the game. I mean because succumbing to TC's necrovirus might end up doing.
Well, just make sure I don't play the necrovirus. Make sure you give it to Andy and see what he does. That'd be fun.
Oh, I think you've already pretty much said. By the way, Andy Scott is somebody on the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly who plays lots of 18xx games, which you've also had mentioned in the comments. And I'm pretty sure that TC just threatened indirectly to hit Andy in the head with the game board if he ever sees him. So it'll be quite an interesting interaction. I kind of want that to happen, maybe, but
I'm just saying if he threatens to play 18xx while I'm holding my copy of Twilight Imperium 3 in my hands, it's going to go somewhere.
Andy just starts setting up the 18xx game. He'd be like, "Hey, Andy, want to play Twilight Imperium?" He'd just be like, "Oh."
Yeah,
and
hey, let me help you set it up.
Yeah, you need to dump it all your game board cocked back. So, well, guys, this has been quite a dramatic end, and I think it's a good spot really to call this one a wrap. And thank all of our listeners out there. This is all about you guys. So, thank you so much to all of you who suggested. I think TC, you were really interested in participating in this episode and getting this one going. And Scott, man, what an excellent job you've done. And I really appreciate how you volunteered to dedicate your time, and it shows how much you really love this epic game.
Yeah, I appreciate the time to come on here because I could never talk about Twilight Imperium too much. It's just a game that I think it's a flagship game in not just for Fantasy Flight, but I think in the gaming world, everyone knows it. You hear Twilight Imperium. I don't know very many people that know board games that won't know what Twilight Imperium is, even if they don't like it. People know what the game is, and I think that's a thing that not a lot of games can really say.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, very, very highly rated. It's in the top 50, top 20. I forgot. I never actually said that, did I? It's number 41 overall. So of all the games ever released, this game that's been out for 12 years still holds a spot in the top 50. So very, very high pedigree. Check out Twilight Imperium 3 if you have any inkling to give that one a shot. So that's all I have to say. And that's been this episode of The Long View. So thanks a lot, guys. And we will catch you on the next episode of The Long View. And now that we've
41. That thing's still holding at 41. Holy cow.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, air quotes here for our ending, TC, because I'm pretty sure that I forgot to introduce myself by name, and I forgot to introduce you by name.
I'll insert all that stuff. If you forget the sponsor, if you forget the Punchboard Media.
I'll give you an audio track here, so that way you can just kind of put it at the front. And I apologize, man. I know how much of a pain in the butt that is, but so let me 3, 2, 1. I am Joe Sallin, co-host of the Longview podcast, together with my other co-host, keeping Portland weird single-handedly, TC Reed. TC, how you doing?
Woo! I'm here talking about my favorite game.
Is it actually your favorite, or is it one of
top 10, baby? Top 10.
Top 10. Okay, which basically to TC, yeah. See, there's so much enthusiasm for every one of those games. They're all his babies, right?
They're my babies. I love them. I love my precious.
All right. And that's it. So, okay,
there we go. That works.
We're done with that as the intro. So, it's kind of fake. I don't like to do things like that. We don't normally do that, Scott. But I just was like, I noticed in the middle of the podcast, I was like, wait a minute. Did I ever say my own name? I don't think I did. So anyway, we're just playing by the seat of our pants, man.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you letting me on. It was a lot of fun.
It's been a blast. You did a really, seriously, you knocked it out here, dude. I'm serious, man. You really did. I'm going to click stop on our broadcast. So anyway, night to everybody. Thanks for showing up. Great to see you guys. Luke, it's been great. Catch you later.